Everybody who knows our history, it was churches often that housed some of the great civil rights activists, where people did training in nonviolent resistance and really helped to change our country. I want to thank the senator. I thought I was the senator that was here, but you just overstaged me in a hot second, man. But this is truly a servant leader and somebody who has been good to me from the second I declared that I was going to run. And I want to thank him for his hand of friendship, for him inspiring me, and him serving the people like he does. Thank you very much. And so why don't we do it this way? I would love to talk to you for about 15 minutes or so about why I am running for President of the United States. I'd like to return up here and maybe let Rhonda ask. She grilled me already for the radio earlier, but I'd like for her to maybe ask me a couple questions. But what I'm really interested in doing, if I can jump on down here, what I'm really interested in doing is having some engagement with the folk here and hearing your questions and hearing your thoughts. Because one of the things I know in this country, and I hope that this becomes the theme of everybody who's running, is that this is not about one office. It is about all of us. Anybody who comes into a community and says, only I can solve these problems, or elect me and I'm going to solve all the problems, they don't know our history. You all know it was not a bunch of men that came on the Senate floor around the turn of the 19th to 20th century who said, you know what, it's time that women have the right to vote. That's not how it happened. It happened because folks organized and activated multicultural, multiracial coalitions, men and women. Frederick Douglass's last meeting was a suffrage meeting. You all know that it wasn't one day Strom Thurmond woke up and said, came to the Senate floor, it's time for those Negro people to have some rights. No. It was activists coming together across racial, religious lines. We had Christian and Jewish, we had atheists. So many people came together to make it happen. And so here we are at a moral moment in our country. We live in a nation right now that pledges to be a place of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, but we have a nation where so many people's pathways to life, life-saving prescription drugs, life-saving health care, are closed off because they cannot afford it. We have this nation now where millions of children, I'm not overstating that number, often find it more easy to find unleaded gasoline than unleaded water. We have a nation that professes to be the land of the free, but we lock up more people than anybody else on the planet Earth. And we say equal justice under the law. That's what it says on the Supreme Court building, but we have a nation that treats you better if you're rich and guilty than if you're poor and innocent. My friend Brian Stevenson points out that we have a country that tortures children, puts them in solitary confinement. This is a moral moment in our country where people who get up and work a full-time job still find themselves with more month at the end of their money than money at the end of their month. And now everything I just mentioned was going on before Donald Trump was president. I know he has been doing horrible things, igniting racism, igniting divisions, rolling back environmental protections. I'm not discounting the urgent need to remove him from office. But I am cautioning everybody. If we think we've done our job and then go back to just doing what we were doing in 2013 and 14, we will not deal with the urgent issues facing our nation. Because in many ways, he is a symptom of a problem and not the problem itself. We as Democrats, we cannot define ourselves by what we're against. We have to define ourselves by what we're for. It can't be I'm just about beating Republicans when the call of this country is to unite Americans to the common cause and common purpose. Because our Republican brothers and sisters are hurting too. Our farmers are hurting. Our factory workers are hurting. There are people who are beginning to lose faith in this nation's economy, lose faith in this nation's democracy to work for them. There are people feeling left out. There are folk who are feeling more and more that the forces tearing our country apart are stronger than those holding us together. Well, I don't believe that. I'm running for president of the United States because I believe in us. I believe in what we can do together. I believe that there is no problem bigger than this nation when we unite in common cause and common purpose. I believe in this country. That we need to put more indivisible back in this one nation under God so that we can address the issues of pain and hurt and inequality and injustice. And when I say I believe in us, I don't just speak by some philosophy. I am speaking because I know our history, because it is my history. Look, when my family, my daddy was born in the mountains of North Carolina, Hendersonville, North Carolina. Some people know where my daddy's from. I was telling some pastors earlier he was born poor, but he would get upset if I said that. He'd be like, boy, don't tell those folk from South Carolina that I was born poor. Tell them the truth. I was just P.O. I couldn't afford the other two letters. Every step my daddy would tell me of how he got where he is because he's hardworking, is because he was grit. I believe in those ideals, self-reliance and rugged individualism, but everybody here knows that rugged individualism didn't get us to the moon. Rugged individualism didn't beat the Nazis, didn't beat Jim Crow, didn't create the Underground Railroad that passaged people to freedom. My daddy got to college at North Carolina Central University because folks in a church, I got an eagle over here, because folks in a church took a collection to make sure he got enough money to enroll. When he was there, he saw opportunities being opened up because folks were marching and sitting in. He got to Washington, D.C. thanks to the Urban League, NAACP, other organizations. He became IBM's first ever black salesman in that entire region. He gets promoted to New Jersey, and then he finds out that when he was looking for places with great public schools, they happened to be white towns, that he'd show up and a real estate agents wouldn't show him the homes. They would say, hey, this house is sold. Oh, I'm sorry. Oh, Mr. Booker, Mrs. Booker, this house has been pulled off the market. I was just a baby in '69. But what did my parents find? They found us. A group just like the folks in this room, diverse backgrounds. It was a Republican town, so there were Republicans and Democrats. There were people who said, this is not who we are. We are the United States of America. We believe in liberty and justice for all. We're going to stand with you. And so they got these lawyers, incredible lawyers, organized a sting operation. My parents would go look at a house. They would find out the house was sold. They found out they'd be told it was sold. And they would leave, and a white couple would come in behind them, looking at the house, pretending they were buyers, find out the house was still for sale. At the house that I grew up in, 123 Norma Road, Harrington Park, New Jersey, my parents were told the house was sold. The white couple comes, finds out the house was still for sale. This volunteer couple just then put a bid on the house. The bid was accepted, papers were drawn up, and on the day of the closing, the white couple did not show up. My father did, and a volunteer lawyer. Now this man, Marty Friedman, comes in. He must have rehearsed his speech all night. My dad said he was so proud to walk in, confront the real estate agent, tell him you're in violation of fair housing law, you're in violation of the morals of our... He didn't get his speech out because as soon as the real estate agent saw he had been caught, he doesn't give up. He stands up and punches my dad's lawyer in the face. And then he sigs a dog on my dad. Now let me tell you something. As I was growing up as a little boy, every time my dad told that story, the dog got bigger. I was 18 years old, on my way to Stanford University on a football scholarship. Yes, I got in because of a 4.0, 1,600, 4.0 yards per carry, 1,600 receiving yards. And my daddy would be like, boy, you better appreciate what you have. I had to fight a pack of wolves to get you in this house. That's who we are. There has always been bigotry and hate in this country. There's always been demagogues in this country. Heck, we had an entire political party called the Know Nothings that rose up as an anti-immigration party against Catholics, against Irish, against Italians. We are never defined by the hatred that has been there. What defines America is that we came together to overcome it in a unified way. Small groups of activists awoken the moral imagination of a country, affirmed the fact that the lines that divide us are not as strong as the ties that bind us. It has been those unified movements in every generation of this country that turned sweatshops and child labor into workers' rights and universal public education. It is those fighters who came together unified for suffrage rights, for voting rights, for civil rights, for Medicaid and Medicare, for Social Security. You look at our history, yes, there's the darkness that's there. Even our founding documents have written into them the bigotries of the time. Native Americans are referred to as savages. Women aren't referred to at all. Blacks are fractions of human beings. But where these imperfect geniuses got it right, they said, hey, if we're going to found this nation as a break from human history, you spin the globe, put your fingers down. Most of the country's borders are formed by tribalism, ethnicity, religion. Pakistan, India, Czechoslovakia split apart because of ancient ethnic ties. We said we would found a country that's not a monarchy, not a theocracy, not because we all look alike or pray alike or descend from the family tree. We will be a nation. We will be a nation of ideals, of principles bigger than the people who put them on paper, and what will make this country strong, invincible in fact, will always be measured by our commitments to one another, by our common sacrifice. That's why they ended the Declaration of Independence with these profound words. It was a declaration of interdependence. The Declaration of Independence ends, says, if we're going to do all this stuff, we must mutually pledge to each other our lives, our fortunes, and our sacred honor. Turn on the TV right now and ask yourself about sacred honor. God, I'm running for President of the United States because I think it's time we have a revival of civic grace, that we have a more courageous empathy, that we begin to see those people rendered to the sidelines who suffer or struggle with mental illness or struggle with addiction or struggle with poverty. Those problems are not bigger than us. Those people are not isolated. They are our brothers and sisters. Injustice anywhere, as King said, is a threat to justice everywhere. Whatever affects one American directly affects us all indirectly. We have common pain all over this country. I want to help us to lead back to that sense of common purpose. And so I'm going to tell you right now, I believe we can be a country where everyone has access to health care, and we realize that health care is a civil right in our country. I want to join with folk to tear down a system of mass incarceration with school-to-prison pipelines that reinvests in education again on all levels. Early childhood education, preschool universal, K through 12, where our teachers don't have to reach into their pockets to pay for their children's food. And our teachers get tax treatment. We give better tax treatment to Wall Street executives than teachers who are adding to our economy more than they are. I believe in us, that we can have an infrastructure that's the envy of the world instead of falling behind. Where in states like this, they have access to broadband everywhere, where they have access to clean water everywhere, where we understand that our rural communities and our urban communities, the only pathway to the 21st century is a nation that invests in people, that invests in infrastructure, that invests in the jobs of tomorrow. We can be that nation. I believe we can be a country where every senior citizen can retire with dignity. Not like the millions that live below the poverty line now because their meager Social Security checks don't go far enough. And so I want to talk about the issues. I want to get up there on that stage and start having a conversation with you, but I've got to make this clear. I might be the only presidential candidate that ever does this, but I started doing it when I was a city council person. You see, my convictions that you're hearing right now did not start with a presidential campaign. I believe life is about purpose, not position. My life purpose has been the same since my daddy looked at me. I told these pastors earlier, my dad was like, boy, graduated again. You got more degrees in the month of July, but you ain't hot. Life is not about the degrees you get, it's about the service you get. You don't need a degree to be a great American. And so what I did when I left law school is I went to the toughest problems in this country. I went down to the inner city of Newark, New Jersey, the neighborhood I still live in, and took on slumlords. People said we couldn't do it, but what did? We organized and showed that the power of the people is greater than the people in power. I became mayor of the city of Newark. It was a city that people were maligning, disrespecting, disregarding, or just plain dissing. And people told me what we couldn't do. We were sinking into a global recession, and I was at the helm of a city, and I said, we are going to show that if we can create uncommon coalitions in this city, we're going to create uncommon results. And before you know it, we had the state's first prisoner reentry programs. We turned empty fields into urban farms. We took our city from shrinking in population, started growing, and we started bringing businesses back to our community. We transformed our education system, now ranked the #1 city in America for high poverty, high performing, beat the odds schools. And I'll tell you this, even in the Senate, where people told me you can't get big pieces of legislation done, I ran telling the people in New Jersey I wanted to change our criminal justice system. My pollsters told me, hey, that's not one of the top issues in New Jersey right now. And I said, look, leaders don't follow consensus, they help mold consensus. This is a cancer on the soul of our country. Between the time I was in law school, the time I was mayor, we were building a new prisoner jail every 10 days in America. Much more comfortable investing 10 times as much on the back end of a problem than a fraction on the front end. I went to Washington, they told me we couldn't pass a comprehensive criminal justice reform bill. Well, we passed it. We reached across the aisle, I found common ground. The last provision that I battled to get in that bill was a ban on the federal level of juvenile solitary confinement that is now the law of the land. And so I want to put a warning label on my campaign, because if you elect me your president, I am going to ask for more from you. Now, this is a room full of activists. That's a hard thing to say. People who are already volunteering, already getting engaged. But I'll tell you this, I've seen a lot more people involved in politics in America since Donald Trump was elected than before Donald Trump. And if he leaves office, we got to stay engaged, stay involved, and I'm going to be a president that asks for people to step up, not to suffer through more, endure more, but I'm going to try to remind them that we are powerful when we stand together. And this is how I want to end, by telling you the end of that story, to tell you about your power. Because I was a senator, and I said, I want to know the second half of this story, and of how I moved into my town. And I found out something that just floored me. I went to go find the head of the Fair Housing Council. I was a senator now. This is 2015, from the 1960s, but she was easy to find because she's still head of the Fair Housing Council in northern New Jersey now. Her name's Miss Lee Porter. She is 92 years old, and she is still leading that organization. Her hands are still on the plow. Now she doesn't represent black families now. Now it is same-sex couples. Now it is Americans with disabilities. Now it is Muslim families. Why? Because to her, justice has no color, no orientation, no religion. It is one justice, one nation under God with liberty and justice for all. And so I asked her, I'm like, Miss Lee Porter, can you confirm some of the facts of this story? Was it a pack of wolves or was it a dog? And she laughs with me and she tells me all the story. I asked her for those lawyers. She says, Cory, find the lawyer. Here's the guy that organized all the lawyers. I call him up and I have this conversation that floored me. It turned out to be a conversation about what real power is about. I called her up and him up and I said, hi, sir, my name is Cory. I know who you are. And I'm like, okay, my name is Cory Booker, sir, and you know what you did for I know what I did for your family. I'm like, okay, sir. And I asked him all the questions I had, confirming all the facts. It was just a dog. And then I'm done, but I think to ask him one more question. This is what I want to leave you with because the answer floored me. I was done with all the questions I had written down, but suddenly I thought to ask him why. Why would this white man in New Jersey, at a time of bigotry and fears of white flight and real estate prices going down, why would he take time at a time when he had just started his business? He was so busy trying to take care of a young family. Why would he take time to help black families move into his neighborhood? And this is what he told me. He goes, I remember the moment I made the decision. And I said, the moment? He goes, I remember the exact moment. And I go, what was that? And he goes, Cory, I was sitting on my couch watching TV. Now, you all remember, this is the 1960s. TV, we only had like 3 channels back then. And some of you remember, some of you don't, you should explain this to them, that at 11 o'clock, the TV would go out. The national anthem would be done. That's why we probably had higher birth rates back then in America. And he's watching TV, 1965, I know the show he was watching, I looked it up. He was watching a movie called Judgment at Nuremberg. And he's riveted by this program. And then something happens. It happens all the time today. You turn on CNN, it's called breaking news. We do it for Melania has a jacket, breaking news. But back then it was very rare. They broke away from this program to show a bridge in Alabama called the Edmund Pettus Bridge. I will be there on Sunday for the 54th anniversary. And he's watching this horror break out. These marchers started in Selma, were going to march towards Montgomery. They get stopped on the Edmund Pettus Bridge, confronted by Alabama state troopers, and these marchers were going to kneel and pray and then turn around. I know that because one of those marchers is my colleague now. He's always been my hero. His name's John Lewis. And he said to me, absolutely, he said to me, we were going to kneel and pray and then turn and go, but suddenly this man in Jersey watching this on TV sees the marchers get gassed. Tear gas shot at him, and then these state troopers run into them and start beating them viciously. John Lewis says to me very humbly, very regally, he says, Cory, I shed a little bit of blood on that bridge that day. And I'm like, Congressman, no. You had your head cracked open. You bled profusely. You had to be carried to safety. You were knocked unconscious. What did this guy in Jersey do as he's watching this? Did he allow his inability to do everything, to undermine his determination to do something? Did he get stuck in a state of sedentary agitation where he's so upset about what he's seeing, but he doesn't do anything about it? No. He told me he gets up off the couch and starts thinking to himself, what can I do? I can't afford a plane ticket to Alabama. I can't close my business for a day. But you know what? Maybe I can just do the best I can with what I have where I am. And he gets on a phone and starts calling around to see who needs maybe a little bit of legal work. Maybe I can give an hour a week. And he finds this woman named Miss Lee Porter who's like, thank you. I need some help. The two of them go to work. He starts organizing other lawyers. 4 years pass. 1969, the year I'm born, he gets a case file handed him by Miss Lee Porter of a couple that was desperate for help. They had 2 young boys. And the name on that case file was Cory and Carolyn Booker, my parents. Think about this power. What is it called? Some people might call it patriotism. Those marchers stood up for patriotism. But what is patriotism? It is love of country, and you cannot love your country unless you love your fellow countrymen and women. Where have we come? Where have we come in America where people are proud? We are a tolerant nation. That's the highest. Please go home tonight and tell somebody you tolerate them and see how much of a compliment it is. We were called to pledge to each other our lives, our fortunes, and our sacred honor. That's what love is. It's not a feeling, it is service, it is sacrifice. It is seeing that your destiny and my destiny are interwoven. We are interdependent. We have one future as a nation. We will either tear each other apart or we will rise together. And on that bridge, they did rise. They rose for patriotism. They rose for love. Even though they didn't make it, they released that energy into the universe. It instantaneously leapt 1,000 miles, changed the heart of one man on a couch in New Jersey, who would then go on and change the destiny of a generation not yet born. I would not be here running for President of the United States if it wasn't for this chain reaction of love, if it wasn't for the power of Americans standing up for this country's values and ideals. And so if this election is a big election, if this election is about the people, if it's about our power, if it's about grace and love and the never-ending fight for justice for all, then we are going to make sure that in this country our tomorrows are better than our yesterdays. We will make sure that in this country justice does roll down like water and righteousness like a mighty stream. We can make sure, if this is a big election, not about a person or an office, but about us, we can make sure that for our generation and the next, that America does indeed rise. Thank you, everybody. Thank you. Thank you. So, we're going to get to your questions. Thank you very much. Thank you. We want to get to your questions. But this is one of the people that impresses me so much because she is not, I was so blown away by her. I met her son, by the way, who intimidated me. I thought he was your bodyguard. But she is not just a great journalist. She's not just a great celebrity. She's one of the great talk show hosts. But she is about building community and what she does in service of others. She uses her platform and position always to try to make the world a better place. I'm just grateful that she would take time out of her day to come here today and try to help out a little bit.
Thank you so much.
So why don't you ask another question and then maybe we can go and you can help me pick hands because I'm trying to get everybody's vote. I don't want to pick somebody over somebody else and get in trouble.
I'll do that. I'll go out into the audience. Can you guys still hear me okay?
Yeah, why don't you go down and I'll follow you down.
Most definitely. So one of the things I wanted to ask, and Senator Booker was just talking about breaking news. Now this was breaking news. We faced a government shutdown.
Yes.
And we saw so many donations being taken for workers who work every single day but didn't know what they were going to do from paycheck to paycheck when they had to work with no funds. So what are some of the things that we can do to ensure, and I've heard you talk about people in your neighborhood in Newark working day after day and still struggling. What are some of those things that we can do to make sure that we have passionate workers who are getting paid what they should be paid, a genuine wage?
So let me separate this out for a second and talk about wages for a second and government dysfunction a second. So first, real quick, we have a nation right now where something really has happened. We came to a point from my father's generation that even if you were working a minimum wage job, if you worked full time, you were above the poverty line. But you all know the minimum wage has not kept up with inflation. And so what was this idea of dignity in this country is if you were willing to get up and work hard, as Martin Luther King said, even if you were a street sweeper, that job has dignity in it. You can provide for your family and that has not kept up. So the first thing is we've got to get back to this idea that in America work pays. We are now at a 60-year low of wages in this country as percentage of GDP, and we need to do a lot of things to get those wages up. So it's not just raising the minimum wage, which must be done. I support a $15 minimum wage. But we also need to do other things that begin to return power to the people when it comes to working. The assault going on unions in this country is unbelievable. And we've now created this so-called right to work, and I know this is a right to work state that has hurt unions in this country. It's an assault on, and I'm here because of union jobs. My grandfather was a UAW worker on the assembly lines in Detroit. We need to make sure that we are investing in people again. I'd love to hear my fellow candidates and others talk about college affordability, free college, whatever. Most Americans don't go to college. And we need to start investing in the kind of pathways that help everyone get jobs And this is apprenticeship programs, technical training, the kind of things that we need to be investing in. And I'm telling you what, give me a plumber over someone with an art history degree. I'm not putting down art history degrees, but that plumber's first year out of finishing their schools are gonna make a lot more money. We should be training people for the jobs of the 21st century and the jobs that are needed. And that person should have dignity. I want to quickly go, because I know there's other questions, but there's a lot more to talk about in that subject, but I quickly want to go to government dysfunction. And this is something we should all realize, because we all have to take responsibility for changing this. So we have a government that now has created such divisions, hardened divisions. And by the way, that shutdown was a Trump shutdown, because even in the Senate, we passed a bipartisan bill to keep the government open, and then he suddenly decides to make it all about a campaign promise he made that he told us Mexico would pay for that we don't need. But the reality is, there is a lot more failure for us as a country to come together on things we agree on even. If you pull out the idea, and don't say this is a Democratic idea or a Republican idea, if you just pull out the idea and poll most of the big ideas you're hearing about, raising the minimum wage polls well with Democrats and Republicans, okay? Having fully fund, put a big effort to create apprenticeship programs and training so kids can learn and earn, polls incredibly well. But the problem is the tribalism that we're in has become so bad in our country. My governor, Chris Christie, who I can write a dissertation on my disagreements with, I'm not exaggerating here, but he was the governor of the state of New Jersey, and I was the mayor of Newark, the largest city. I could have spent a lot of time giving myself political cred, holding press conferences, attacking him all the time. But my people in my neighborhood, I'm the only person in the Senate who lives in a low-income, inner-city community. They didn't care about how much I didn't like Chris Christie. They wanted results for their community, so I found common ground and worked with him. But let me tell you, Chris Christie, running for President of the United States in New Hampshire, he lost over 10 points in the polls for this sin. This is the only thing they talked about in the ad. They ran ads against him for the sin of hugging Barack Obama. Now look, I felt the same thing. I got attacked on Twitter by people on my side of the political aisle when I was on the Senate floor one day, and one of my colleagues who had a cancer diagnosis, it turned out to be a terminal cancer diagnosis, a guy named John McCain, he came onto the floor of the Senate. It was in the middle of this healthcare debate. I walked across the aisle and hugged the man. So it was in the front of the C-SPAN camera, so about 15 Americans saw me. 16 including my mom. And by the time I got home at night, I was being chewed up on Twitter by people on our side of the political aisle. Some of them said, "How could you hug that baby killer?" And so my point to answer this question is some of this dysfunction we're seeing right now is solely responsible because of the man who's in the executive. But there's a lot of other dysfunction is because people feel if they go across the aisle, there's sanctions for that. This is why I'm saying if this election is for Democrats, is about beating Republicans, then we miss the larger calling of this moment in American history, which is about uniting Americans to common cause. You want to?
Most definitely. Senator Booker has someplace else to be, so I don't want to fill the day with my questions. I want to definitely give you all a chance to ask questions. We're ready to go. Yes. Ready to go?
That is an incredible T-shirt. I don't want to assume that it's maybe Booker T. Washington. Is it maybe 46? I like that number. That has a special appeal to me. That is awesome.
So let's start out on this side and work our way over. The lady here in the blue
shirt. But make sure you go right too, because I'm a bipartisan guy trying to work across the aisle.
Senator Booker, we need to win.
Yes.
So I'm interested in your strategy to appeal to the demographics we lost, the heartland, the rural area, the small towns, the farmers.
So I want to say two things, because first of all, we must win. We have no case whatsoever. So two things. First, let me just go to the groups you're talking about. So I've been out to rural areas, not just in this state, but in Missouri, in Western Illinois, in Kansas, Nebraska, meeting with farmers, many of them Republican farmers. And when you sit down and actually talk about the issues going on in their lives, they agree wholeheartedly with the people in this room. Let me give you a couple examples. One is a Republican farmer was telling me about how much the independent family farms are disappearing in this country. They're under assault, that we have farmer suicide rates as high as they've been. These are folks who are in pain right now and didn't feel like any party necessarily was serving them. And so what's one of the things causing a lot of their pain? Well, their share of the consumer dollar has gone down about 50%. So when we buy our tomato, they're getting a dramatic less. Why? Because of all this corporate consolidation that's going on, our failure to enforce antitrust, the Stockyard and Packers Act, you now have the 5 or 6 people they can sell their goods to now becoming one person. Underneath them, companies like Monsanto and others are driving, who have monopoly control over their seeds and more, are driving up their costs. This growth of corporate power in our country is hollowing out rural communities, it's hurting factory towns, and it's hurting people in inner city communities. And we need to start talking about solutions to do things about that, like actually enforcing antitrust laws as more and more of these corporations consolidate. So when you start talking to folks like that, I went from one guy not even wanting me in his house. He went up on I guess, Fox News or something and called the person back and said, I can't have Cory in this house, we're a Christian family. And the person laughed. This is how much we demonize each other in this country. To the point where if a Republican walked in this room, people might boo them before they even hear what they have to say. They might come in here to agree with us on stuff. So we have to get back to understanding that common pain and that common purpose, because on so many issues, they want access to health care. They want to have a living wage. They want their kids to have public schools where the teachers actually get paid enough to live. These are common things that we have to start talking to people about their pain. But I just want to tell you one other thing, though. We also lost that election because our base didn't turn out. I went to Wayne County, which is where Detroit is. Their numbers were dramatically lower there. I went to Philly, which is a neighbor of my state. Their numbers, they needed about 10 or 15,000 more people out of Philadelphia. They had them. If they had a fraction of what Obama got a few years before, we would have won Pennsylvania. The same thing with the urban areas of Wisconsin and Minnesota. So this is both. It's energizing our base, many of whom are checking out because politics doesn't work for them, and it's reaching out to people who you may think disagree with us, but truly we have a lot more commonalities than people want to admit. All right?
So we'll take one from the middle and then we'll run over to the right. How about right here?
Why do you look so hesitant?
I felt so bad when she... Hi, how are you, Senator Booker?
I'm well, thank
my
you.
name is Mildred Williams, and I am a Newark, New Jersey native.
What?
351 South 12th Street, Newark, New Jersey.
Oh my gosh.
West Side High School.
Oh my gosh.
Whoop whoop, I had to say that.
A rough rider in my house.
A rough rider, yes. Unfortunately, you weren't the mayor when I was there with Ken Gibson and the other guy, Sharp James or something like that. So I have a question. You mentioned about mental illness and addiction. I am a mental health and addiction specialist. Go back about 30 years, give or take a few. And one of the things that I think is important for us to think about is we are concerned about all of the shootings, the mass shootings that have been taking place in this country, but I think we've minimized the underlying issue, which is the mental health issue. And so my question to you is, what kind of parameters do you plan to put in place to make sure that folks receive the appropriate amount of treatment that they need? Folks are showing up in the emergency room who are alcoholics, addicts, who have mental illness, and they're not getting the treatment that they need. But if someone who have a heart attack or high blood pressure, an illness that's more socially accepted, they get treatment over that person with mental illness and addiction. So I just hope that maybe you can look at our not discriminating against folks with mental health issues and addiction issues. So that's kind of my heart, and
thank you for that heart of compassion, that heart of empathy. And what we do right now as a society is so outrageous. We try to treat mental health problems with prison and jail. Overwhelmingly, we see we're a country that plows people who need medical help into our prisons and jails at a much higher expense. We don't do early intervention. Our schools, we are often asking our teachers to be mental health care professionals when our public schools need to have people that can treat not just a school nurse, but somebody who is a mental health care professional. Let me give you another example, housing. Seattle, Washington did an experiment to see what costs more, to keep mentally ill homeless people on the streets or to put them in supportive housing. And what they found out, they studied 23 individuals, their costs on the streets, their costs in supportive housing, and they found that they saved taxpayers about $1 million by finding housing for mentally ill people. Why? Because mentally ill people often who are homeless will end up in our hospital emergency rooms and in our jails, which is so much more expensive. And so I learned when I was a mayor that I had to be incredibly frugal in managing a city. I couldn't print more money. I had to manage my city. So we started realizing that if we invest in things on the front end, we could drive down the back end costs, including prescription drugs. This is something people don't talk about, but I've had so many of people that I know who have really expensive mental health drugs, and they end up having to put them aside because they just can't afford the cost of those drugs. So the things that I'm gonna do is fund supportive housing more, fund a system that works to create more mental health care facilities in our country so that we're not dealing with them in the largest mental health care facility in America right now, which is jails where people aren't getting help. We need to make sure that we're making more robust what Obamacare did, which was try to create parity between mental health and physical health ailments, but we need to be a lot more robust in that so it's a lot more comprehensive. And we need to do the common sense things to lower prescription drug costs. What are they, real quick? One is, I wrote the bill with Senators Casey and Sanders to allow importation from other countries if our country's not going to do it. 2 is letting Medicare negotiate prices, and 3 is doing what other countries do that America needs to start doing, which says that if you are lowering a prescription drug cost, the cost of a drug in another country, and you're making us in America have a much higher drug, then you will have to lower your cost or we will remove your patent from you and allow generics to get in. All right?
Okay, we had a question. We have a couple questions right here in the back.
You hold it, I hold it. Hi. So we had the pleasure of having you to speak at our Moms Clean Air Force play-in last year. And on the heels of Andrew Wheeler being confirmed on yesterday to head the EPA, I'm wondering what your plan is for the environment, specifically as it relates to environmental justice and communities of color that are disproportionately affected.
So I'm so grateful because I have actually written the seminal bill in the United States Senate for environmental justice. And you have heard this. I have gone around this country from Duplin County, North Carolina, where these massive CAFOs are poisoning rivers and poisoning streams. Been up to Uniontown, Alabama, where this town was forced to have a toxic dump that is saturating into their soil, where the property values have gone down. I've gone to a place in Louisiana called Cancer Alley, the stretch of the Mississippi River from Baton Rouge all the way to New Orleans, where the cancer clusters are off the charts. And I sat in small black churches as people were packed in, not to see me, but to see somebody from the federal government who was willing to come down and hear their pain, the loss of their families. And in Newark, New Jersey, I've got toxic dumps, toxic waste sites called Superfund sites in my city limits, and children that we now know that are born around these Superfund sites, which proliferate in every single state, the numbers of them going up. You have 20%, significantly higher rates of autism and birth defects. I know we want to talk about climate, and if somebody asks me those questions, I have a great vision for a green future and for us to deal with this planetary peril. But right now in America, children, seniors, Americans are dying because we do not focus on environmental justice issues. And so when I am President of the United States, we are going to hold polluters accountable. We're going to give local people the ability, standing to sue. We're going to invest in environmental cleanup by putting small taxes on these polluting industries so that we can reinvest those in cleaning up toxic states. I am so fired up because I've stood with suffering families and communities who've lost the value of their land, who tell me about the cancers and the awful deaths of their family members. This is something we should be talking about everywhere. And the last thing I'll say, lead in our water systems, the poisoning of American water systems from coast to coast, now from north to south, is so unconscionable that we have not created a water infrastructure or updated our water infrastructure from my grandparents' era, which is allowing a lot of this lead to get in. We need a massive, I will lead a massive infrastructure bill that invests over $1 trillion in updating America's infrastructure from broadband access all the way to clean water. All right?
We have time for one more question, and we haven't heard from a gentleman, so.
Rashawn, how bad?
Thank you very much, Senator Booker. I am a new American.
Sir, I apologize. I didn't hear, I heard you were an American, but I didn't hear the first part.
New American.
New American, fantastic, fantastic.
I have worked in academia and with a lot of people from STEM. I noticed that in universities, STEM, science, technology, engineering, and math, are lacking in American content, in the sense of that there are a lot of students that are not American. We would like to do something about this because this is where we gain more in the process in the 21st century. Sir, I'd like to hear your opinion about higher education in that area.
So the STEM fields are the fields of the future, and we are woefully not producing the levels that we used to in terms of STEM graduates. We used to be the #1 country on the planet Earth for people graduating with STEM degrees. Now we're being passed by other countries that are putting more emphasis on that. And so what we need to do is, it doesn't start in college, it starts in the earliest of ages. Genius is equally distributed. There's many geniuses in low-income areas as there are in high-income, rural, as in suburban. We need to begin to cultivate the genius of this country when brains are beginning to be developed. That means not leading the planet Earth as a developed nation. We lead the planet Earth of developed nations in infant mortality and maternal mortality because we're not there for women when their babies are being born in the trimesters before. We need to make sure that we have universal preschool so the kids don't show up. I know there's some teachers here who know the kids are coming to kindergarten and first grade well behind where they should be because we're not investing in it. It means creating home environments that are supportive of our children. That means doing common sense things that every other industrial nation has, which is paid family leave to make sure that when kids are sick or in trouble, family members can be there. All of these things lead up to then K through 12 education. We are starving public education in America right now. We don't even fully fund things like special needs education, the federal commitment to special needs education. These are things I will change. We need to have, in the same way when Kennedy did something bold and said we're going to go to the moon, we need to have the same thing with bolstering the STEM sciences by investing in public education in our country and helping teachers deal with the onerous debt that they have. If they're going to teach for our country, serve our children, they should not be having that kind of financial debt from college and universities. It means making sure that we create pathways into the technical fields that are not just colleges and universities, which I'll get to in a second, but there are a lot of technical training courses help you can be programming, the kind of technical training for advanced manufacturing that we need. And then finally in colleges, one is these colleges can't be allowed to indiscriminately raise the cost of tuition over and over again. And there has to be accountability. If you're receiving federal dollars, you have to be accountable to controlling your costs. And then we as a country need to prioritize affordable college again in this country and help people who have the skills that they want to pursue, help them be able to get plans to get there. I just got to take one more quick question. I just feel bad that we're running behind, but I'm going to let you do it.
Okay. Make me feel guilty.
Yes.
She had her hand raised
Yes.
first, so I wanted to come back to you.
Okay.
Thank you. So you had talked about earlier about the voting in the black communities, how we really didn't turn out.
Yes, and I just shouldn't say it's not only the black communities.
No.
It's communities all over.
It's all over in the rural and you know, everywhere.
Yes.
But I just specifically want to talk about the African American community not turning out.
Yes.
So in that being said, what do you think we need to do? Because I have something that I think we should do, but what do you plan to do to ignite us? Because the wealth gap is so big. It's been like that, and being that this year is going to be 400 years that mark the first slaves coming over to America, and we, I feel, are not just in action for no reason, which you spoke about earlier. I feel like we're in action because we have been let down, trodden down, just discouraged. We come out, but then nobody really gives legislation specifically to us. And so is there anything, not only just the criminal justice reform, which would be specific for us, but is there anything that you want to do to propose, like Congresswoman Sheila Jackson Lee with HR 40 for the study of reparations? Is there something like that that you want to propose or to support to get us united and fired up so that we will feel that we have a purpose again and that there is hope and that there is more that we can do?
What's your name? What's your name?
My name is Tanya Winbush. I'm from Anderson County, and I'm the first vice chair of the Anderson County Democratic Party.
So Tanya, I have a question for you real quick. You said you had one idea that can fire people up. Can you give me that idea, Tanya? Because I think I'm here to learn as much as I am to share as well.
So my idea is you being able to specifically speak to a younger generation, African American generation, hip hop generation, to let them know that we care and that we are rooting for them and that they are important and how powerful their craft and their talent is, because everyone loves hip-hop music. They love the hair, they love the clothes, they love the style, and that goes over every race. Everybody loves it, and I just don't think they understand how powerful they are. And I think people like you and other people that want to run for office in the presidential election, if we include them more, I think it would ignite us more.
I love that answer, and I love the question as well. So I'm going to use your question to end with, but I just want to say to the young lady who was asking me about the strategy, so much of honoring people and getting their votes is showing up and letting people know that you care. I sat with a guy who was in charge of coal miners, a coal miner union leader, and looked him in the eyes, if I'm the nominee, I'm going to come to coal mines and talk to people that we lost that should have been our voters, but he said we must have lost over 50% of his membership. So much is being there and talking directly to people. There's no reason why coal miners shouldn't be 100% with our party, what they're trying to do to Davis-Bacon and all the other kind of things that undermine union leadership. And so a lot of my strategy for all people is making sure that you are there, that you have an agenda that speaks to their pain, to their hurts, and their fears, but even more importantly, to their hopes and their aspirations and their dreams. To remind people that this delusion of separateness that we have in this country, that somehow that farmer is disconnected from that end consumer in my neighborhood, where my folks at the bodega walk into a bodega and find a Twinkie product cheaper than an apple or a tomato, and we don't think that that's part of the same broken system that the people on both ends are suffering for. We need to get back to this understanding that we are interwoven, and we have it. But you're asking me a very specific question about African Americans. And I want you to know, as a guy that grew up in a black church, as a guy who comes from many generations into the South, North Carolina, Alabama, Louisiana, where my roots are from, as a guy who is here because of the African American freedom struggle, and there was many people from many different faiths and backgrounds in that struggle, but I directly benefited from those historic civil rights organizations. And my generation is the hip hop generation. And I don't want you to walk around here saying like, don't believe the hype. I want you to be more like, fight the power, okay? And so let me tell you right now, first of all, I don't forget where I come from. I told you I'm the only United States Senator goes back to a black community. I was a mayor of a majority black city. And so much of the stuff that I fight for may not get attention, but it is morally outrageous that something like sickle cell anemia doesn't get nearly the same funding as diseases, disorders that affect less people. That is the baked-in discrimination that we still have in our society. I have a marijuana bill, and everybody's like, oh, Cory supports legalization of marijuana. No, I support that, but I support it and put forward a Marijuana Justice Act because I think it's outrageous in the United States of America. There's no difference between blacks and whites for using marijuana or dealing marijuana, but blacks are almost 4 times more likely to be arrested for it and jailed for it. And anybody, black or white, who gets arrested for it, remember, we live in a society where there was more marijuana arrests in 2017 than there were violent crime arrests. So much of our law enforcement is going to prohibition of a drug that many people need medically. But think about this. My law says, sounds like I call it economic redistributive justice. I say if we have marijuana laws, we're producing billions of dollars of tax money, we should be investing that tax money back into the communities that were disproportionately targeted and damaged and hurt by it. So from what I do on sickle cell, what I do on criminal justice reform, what I do on economic opportunity. Let me give you one of the most obscure things you're ever going to hear in a presidential speech. But I went down to Washington, and I know one way that people are making a lot of money in this world is in the world of Wall Street, managing pensions and all of this. And I say, okay, well, who's managing the federal pension dollars? The biggest dollars on the planet Earth. Because in New Jersey, we fought to make sure emerging pension managers, women and minorities, got a shot to manage some of New Jersey's pension. Texas is a red state. They have an emerging pension managers program. People are becoming wealthy from doing this. And by the way, who pays into the pensions in the federal government? Folks that look like this room, okay? Women do, minorities do, all folks do. And so I go down, this is 2013, and ask, how many emerging managers are giving a chance to manage the pension? And they said 0, not 1 person. And so I went down there and saying, hey, we've got to make some changes up here in the Senate and the federal government. I was appalled when I got to be a senator to see how little diversity there was on Senate staffs. You talk about being in the room where it happens, and there's a paucity of women in those rooms. You have pieces like the Judiciary Committee where you can barely find a black person, even though they're making laws that disproportionately affect African Americans. And so I am about justice, and I don't hide it. I'm not going to be gentle or polite when it comes to fighting for these issues, because I go home to Newark, New Jersey, where my neighbors on my blocks, I had Shahad Smith murdered on my block last year with an assault rifle. Across the street, Integrity House is a drug treatment center, and I sit with those circles of men from time to time, and they tell me how many times they've been arrested and sent to jail before people started thinking, well, wait, maybe this person needs drug treatment. I see how unfair it is. My workers who work at the airport, they don't work for United or the airlines, but they deliver the food for those planes. They clean those planes, and they live in my neighborhood and don't have enough money to raise a family. And so I am motivated every single day. Life is about purpose, not position. What made me run for city council in 1998 is the same issues making me run for president of the United States. And my thing, I'm going to turn it back on you and everybody in this room, because I put that warning label and now's my ask. I hope I've earned some votes here today. I hope I've earned some support. But I put it on you. I want your vote. But I want you to go on my website and give $1. Why? Because I'm not taking corporate PAC money. I am not taking pharma executive money. I'm not taking federal lobbyist money. You cannot campaign wrong and think you're going to govern right. But the last point I want to make, which is my worry to the 2 young ladies who asked similar questions about how you're going to appeal to a rural farmer or someone in a factory town or an inner city African American who's just had enough of the system. I'm looking at you, black women, highest voters in the country right now, the demographic, but we shouldn't be clapping 60%. Okay? This is what I turn it back on you. There is a woman, African-American woman, on the 5th floor of the projects that I lived in for 10 years, almost 10 years, 8 years to be exact. Her son was murdered in the lobby of the building that I lived in. But in the 1980s, before I moved in, I found out that, and I went to Miss Jones, tough woman. She scared me more than a UCLA linebacker. She was our president in these projects that had no heat, hot water. We battled that slumlord. He eventually got convicted in federal court. And she looks at me and I go, Miss Jones, your son, I can't believe it. You could move out of these buildings. I know the money you make. I know where you work. Why do you still stay here? And she looks at me almost angry at the question. Why do I stay here? I go, yes, Miss Jones. Why am I still in apartment 5A? That's what I asked, Miss Jones. Why am I still the tenant president since these buildings were built in 1969? And I go, yes, Miss Jones, why? And she goes, because I'm in charge of Homeland Security. She took responsibility for her country. She couldn't save every child, but I'm telling you, if you were in those buildings, she saved lives. She kept heat and hot water on for seniors. She literally got dragged into court by the slumlord because one day she just hauled off and hit him. I don't encourage violence, but when the judge looked at this little old lady and the big guy, she threw the case out of court. And everybody in that community, you know, she was fighting every day for us. And so my point to you is that she defined hope to me. This is the definition of hope I now have. Hope is the active conviction that despair will never have the last word. And I worry, I am really worried that we win an election and then the democracy, the vibrancy, the engagement goes down. That 2022 we lose Congress because people don't turn out and vote. And so I want to end with you with the hopeful moment of my life that I'm asking everybody to be. It was a time I was seduced by despair, which was the inauguration of a new president, 2017, January. I was standing up there listening to an inaugural speech that part of me was hoping might be a speech about coming together as a country. But this guy, there was no malice towards none, charity to all. It was like malice towards a lot of people, charity towards few. It was such a strange speech. I know I'm up in church, but this is a president quote. George Bush is walking out, turns to Bill Clinton and looks at him and goes, that was some strange shit. And what do I do? What do? I go home that night with a throbbing headache because I'm thinking about health care, I'm thinking about environmental regulations, all the things that they can do to us because they control both houses of Congress and the presidency. I'm worried, Supreme Court seats, Obamacare, I'm worried. I curl up with a throbbing headache, but I tell you what I love about faith, I love about hope. It says it in the Bible, weeping may endure through the night, but joy cometh in the morning. What was my joy as I'm curled up in a ball? I wake up the next morning and over 5 million women, Miss Joneses, come out and they say to me, faith and hope are the active conviction that despair will not have the last word. Don't surrender to despair, Cory. This is not a time to curl up. It is not a time to shut up. It is not a time to give up. This is America. We make change by rising up, speaking up, standing up. And if we do that now, if we do that in 2020, if we keep on doing that, America, we will rise.